You know, most days this stretch of water doesn't make headlines, doesn't raise alarms, and honestly doesn't feel dangerous to anyone at all. What cargo ships pass through quietly, following routes drawn long ago, carrying energy, industrial parts, and everyday goods without anyone really noticing. On maps, it looks like just a narrow blue line between two coasts. Nothing dramatic, nothing that feels like a future battlefield. But then the calendar flips to late December, and suddenly this ordinary sea begins appearing in serious military briefings. China announces live-fire military drills in nearby waters, not a simulation on paper, but exercises using real weapons and real forces. Zones are drawn on official maps, red shapes spreading across the sea, quietly redefining where ships and planes are allowed to move. No shots are fired at cities, no invasion begins, but something important about this place has already changed. So the real question becomes this: what actually happens when a normal sea starts being treated like a warning zone? Official statements follow quickly, as China's military confirms large-scale exercises are now underway around Taiwan and its surrounding waters. This time, it's not just maneuvers or simulations, but drills that openly include live-fire training with real weapons. Multiple exercise zones appear almost simultaneously, marked across different sections of sea and airspace near Taiwan. When these zones are placed together on a map, a clear pattern slowly begins to emerge. They don't sit on just one side, but spread across the north, south, east, and west of Taiwan. From above, the island looks partially surrounded, not completely encircled, but clearly no longer open in every direction. Naval vessels move into position, aircraft take off, and missile units are shown as part of a coordinated operation. Chinese officials describe this as a joint exercise, involving multiple branches operating under a single command structure. In their words, the drills are meant as a warning directed at Taiwan independence forces and external interference. Notably, there is no mention of invasion or occupation, only repeated emphasis on deterrence and response. On paper, this remains an exercise, framed as a political message rather than the opening move of a war. But exercises don't happen in a vacuum, especially when they involve real weapons and busy civilian routes. Even before any analysis begins, the presence of these zones starts changing how people move through the sea. And that's where this story begins to move beyond announcements and into real-world consequences. China has held drills near Taiwan before, so the question isn't whether this is new, but whether it's different. Past exercises usually focused on limited areas, often concentrated on one side of the island. This time, the map looks different, with zones spread out rather than clustered together. When analysts place the old and new maps side by side, the contrast becomes immediately visible. The number of exercise zones increases, and their positions extend across multiple directions at once. Some of these zones overlap with major shipping lanes and approaches to key Taiwanese ports. That overlap doesn't automatically mean blockade, but it does change how the drills are interpreted. Duration matters too, as multiple zones operating together create more sustained pressure over time. Instead of a single message from one direction, this setup sends signals from several angles at once. It's still labeled an exercise, but its shape feels closer to a scenario than a simple demonstration. That's why comparisons start appearing in headlines, asking whether this looks more systematic than before. At this point, the focus quietly shifts from intention to impact, and from statements to consequences. Almost immediately, the drills begin affecting civilian systems, starting not with explosions but with warnings on navigation and flight routes. Sahuain air traffic controllers receive updates, as certain airspaces near Taiwan are flagged as temporarily restricted or risky. Airlines respond cautiously, rerouting flights, adjusting schedules, or delaying departures to avoid uncertainty near the drills. Airports stay open, passengers keep moving, but behind the scenes, normal planning is quietly breaking down. At sea, shipping companies face similar decisions, as exercise zones intersect with some of the region's busiest routes. Cargo vessels begin adjusting course, choosing longer paths to avoid areas now marked with red warnings on maps. No one orders them to turn back, but risk calculations start changing the moment those zones appear. Insurance companies quietly recheck policies, reevaluating what counts as acceptable risk in these waters. This isn't a shutdown, not a blockade, but it's no longer business as usual either. For crews and planners, uncertainty becomes the main problem, not gunfire, not missiles, just unanswered questions. Every detour means more fuel, more time, and higher costs quietly stacking up across the system. None of this looks dramatic on television, yet it's exactly how pressure starts building without a single shot fired. What changes first isn't territory or control, but behavior, choices, and the way people move through space. And by now, it's clear this story is no longer just about drills, but about how systems react to risk. So here's the obvious question. Why does this narrow stretch of water matter so much to everyone watching right now? Think of the Taiwan Strait like a highway interchange, where multiple routes cross and slowing one lane jams everything worldwide. It connects the East China Sea and the South China Sea, basically stitching together half of Asia's shipping traffic every day. Oil tankers from the Middle East use this route to reach Japan and Korea without taking long, expensive detours overseas first. Container ships carry parts and components that factories depend on, meaning delays here ripple straight into store shelves worldwide quickly. And then there's Taiwan, which plays a huge role in advanced chips, the tiny brains inside almost everything you use. So when this waterway gets tense, it's less like a storm at sea and more like traffic lights turning red everywhere. That's why even exercises matter here, because markets and planners hate surprises, especially ones drawn in red circles on maps. Close a lane on a quiet road, nobody cares, but touch a major interchange and the whole city feels it. The Taiwan Strait is that interchange, busy on normal days, critical on bad ones, and impossible to ignore for everyone. If ships reroute, costs rise. If flights detour, schedules slip. And those small changes stack up across the system. That's why this isn't just about Taiwan or China, but about how fragile global movement really is right now. You don't need a war to cause disruption here, just enough risk to make people hesitate and rethink routes quickly. And hesitation spreads faster than missiles, moving through spreadsheets, schedules, and inboxes before the wider economic system reacts. That's the quiet power of this place. Small signals here can echo across economies far away within days, sometimes weeks. Which brings us back to the drills, because in this location, even practice runs carry real consequences for everyone involved. When people hear the word blockade, they imagine ships stopped by force, but reality often works much more quietly than that. You don't need to physically block every ship if you can make the route feel unsafe enough to avoid. It's like putting up a road sign saying "accident ahead," even if the road itself isn't actually closed yet. Some drivers turn back immediately, others slow down, and traffic builds without anyone ordering a stop. At sea and in the air, risk works the same way, spreading through calculations, not commands. Insurance premiums rise, paperwork gets reviewed, and suddenly the safe option isn't the fastest anymore. No one says you must not pass, but the message is clear enough for companies to hesitate. This kind of pressure doesn't make headlines like explosions, but it changes behavior all the same. Over time, repeated warnings turn into habits, and habits quietly reshape normal routes and schedules. That's when people start saying, "This is just how things work now," without realizing what shifted. In military terms, this sits somewhere between peace and war, a gray zone that's hard to define. Nothing is officially closed, nothing is officially attacked, yet movement becomes slower and costlier. That's why analysts pay attention to drills here, not for what they destroy, but for what they discourage. You see, and once discouragement sets in, a blockade doesn't need to be declared to start functioning. Imagine a cargo ship captain checking the map, seeing red zones ahead, and quietly asking whether today's route is still worth it. No one forces a decision, but the captain knows delays mean costs and risks mean responsibility that won't disappear later. Somewhere else, an airline operations manager watches updates, deciding whether a small detour now avoids bigger trouble later. Canceling flights angers passengers, but flying through uncertainty could anger regulators and insurers even more. In an office far from the sea, an insurance analyst quietly recalculates numbers that most people never see. Those numbers decide what counts as acceptable risk, long before any politician makes a speech. None of these people are thinking about strategy or ideology, just whether today's choice will cause trouble tomorrow. Each decision feels small, almost boring, but together they quietly reshape how movement actually happens. A ship reroutes here, a flight delays there, and suddenly patterns begin shifting without any announcement. This is how pressure works now, not with orders or force, but through thousands of cautious calculations. No single decision makes headlines, yet their combined effect slowly becomes impossible to ignore. By the time officials respond, behaviors have already changed, and old routes no longer feel normal. This isn't chaos and it's not panic, just careful people adapting to signals they can't dismiss. And that adaptation, step by step, is what gives these drills meaning far beyond the firing range. This is why the story doesn't stop at Taiwan, because once routes shift here, other countries start paying attention. For the United States, this waterway matters because freedom of movement underpins how its alliances function globally. Naval patrols aren't just about presence, but about signaling that routes remain open, predictable, and usable. Japan watches closely too, because much of its energy supply passes through nearby waters without many alternatives. Any disruption here quickly turns into higher prices, tighter supplies, and uncomfortable political questions back home. South Korea is tied in as well, through trade routes, energy imports, and regional security calculations. Even countries farther away feel effects indirectly, as global shipping adjusts and schedules ripple outward. None of these governments are rushing to conclusions, but none are ignoring the signals either. What worries planners isn't a single drill, but the idea that these patterns could repeat and normalize. Once something becomes routine, responses get slower, debates get harder, and leverage quietly shifts. That's why statements, patrols, and diplomacy all move carefully around this narrow stretch of sea. Because here, small changes don't stay local. They echo outward, shaping decisions far beyond the horizon. After the drills end, the red zones disappear from maps and the sea looks calm again, almost like nothing happened. Ships return to familiar routes, planes resume schedules, and daily movement slowly finds its old rhythm back. But something lingers, not in headlines, but in calculations, meetings, and cautious planning documents. Everyone remembers how quickly a normal sea turned into a warning zone without a single battle. That memory quietly changes how future risks are measured, long after the exercises officially end. So maybe the question was never just about drills, but about how pressure works before war begins. Was this simply a message, carefully calibrated, or a rehearsal testing how far disruption could go? The story doesn't answer that, but leaves it with you. After hearing this, what do you think?